Hi again. In the conclusion of this section of A History of Christianity by Kenneth Latourette, Expansion through the Crusades, he deals here with the negative effects upon Christian history and the Christian Church of the Crusades, primarily the negative effects. The crusading idea, first of all, he wants to deal with the crusading spirit. He says the crusading idea of a holy war commanded and blessed by the church, had become deeply implanted in the Western European mind. Crusades were not confined to expeditions to retake or protect the holy places in Palestine. They were waged against Muslims in the Iberian Peninsula, against the pagan Wends and Prussians, against the heretical Cathari, and against still others, some of them Christians, whom the popes adjudged enemies of the faith. Here he deals with military monastic orders. Military orders arose from the Crusades. Their members took the standard monastic vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, but were warriors who had dedicated their lives and their arms to the service of Christ. We have already noted the Knights of the Sword and the Teutonic Knights. More famous were the Templars and Hospitallers. The former were founded in 1119 with headquarters near the temple site in Jerusalem. Their purpose was to protect pilgrims and fight in defense of the Holy Land. They were popular as symbols and guardians of the holy places and became wealthy through the gifts of the pious. Wealth brought them enemies, and their independence of the bishops aroused the dislike of these ecclesiastics. In 1312, the Pope suppressed the order, and much of its property went to the Hospitallers. These Hospitallers, or Knights of St. John, were based upon a hospital in Jerusalem near the Church of St. John Baptist, which had been originally founded by Charlemagne. As their name indicates, the first purpose of the Hospitallers was to care for the sick, but in the 12th century they were made into a military order. They long maintained headquarters on the island of Rhodes, and then, until 1798, on Malta. There were other crusading orders, among them one in Portugal, the Order of Christ, which succeeded to the property of the Templars in that kingdom. One of its Grand Masters, Prince Henry the Navigator, in the 15th century directed the exploring expeditions along the west coast of Africa, which were to outflank the Muslim world and prepare the way for the extensive spread of Christianity in the south and east of Asia. Now he deals with the crusading heritage. The Crusades constitute one of the most striking and thought-provoking features of the history of Christianity. While in spirit many of the wars of the Eastern Empire were closely akin to them, they were primarily an outgrowth of the Latin or Western wing of the Catholic Church. They may be regarded as a phase of the activist temper of much of Western Christianity. Here was an effort to achieve the kingdom of God on earth by the methods of that world which the New Testament declares to be at enmity with the gospel. To put it in Augustinian terms, it was the employment of the instruments of the earthly city to further the city of God. Arising from a mixture of motives, they enlisted much devotion. Here and there were Christians who questioned whether basically they were true to the gospel, and many more deplored the cruelty, immorality, and pride which went with them. However, the great majority of the Christians of Western Europe accepted them and endorsed them. In this, the Papacy, the head of the Western Church, led. The Crusades constituted a complete reversal of the attitude of the early Christians towards war. As we have seen, that was predominantly one of condemnation. By the majority, participation in it as a soldier was deemed inconsistent with the Christian ideal. Later, the theory was developed that wars could be just. Now some wars were regarded as holy, and in fulfillment of the purposes of God. Deus vult, that is, God wills it, was the cry. The Crusades had important consequences. They stimulated the growth, already beginning, of the commerce of the Italian cities. They brought Western Europe into intimate contact with the high civilizations of the Near East. Yet they failed in their primary objectives. They did not put the holy places permanently into the possession of Christians. They weakened rather than strengthened the Greek Church and the Eastern Empire in their resistance to aggressive Islam. Minorities from the Eastern churches were won to fellowship with Rome, but the Crusaders and Crusades deepened rather than bridged the widening rift between the Western and Eastern wings of the Catholic Church. Probably they intensified the hatred and scorn of Muslims for the Christian name. The Crusades aided somewhat in the geographic spread of Christianity, principally along the south and east shores of the Baltic, and to a lesser extent in the ephemeral Franciscan and Dominican missions in Central Asia and the Far East. However, they may actually have retarded the understanding of the gospel. They were an aspect of the partial capture of the church by the warrior tradition and habits of the barbarian peoples who had mastered Western Europe and had given their professed allegiance to the Christian faith. So Latourette is of the mind, obviously, in this whole chapter, that the rapid spread of Christianity among the barbarian peoples of especially Northern and Eastern Europe was not in the long run, a beneficial maneuver of the rulers who accepted Christianity even for their own subjects. Next time, the next chapter is the revival through monasticism, the rich and varied development of the monastic ideal in Western Europe. See you next time.